You won't believe what happened when I decided to finally put up a fence on my property. For months, I've been dealing with this one neighbor, let's just call her HOA Karen, who seemed to think she had a say over every inch of land. Around here, she always had something to complain about, whether it was my garden, my mailbox, or even the way I trimmed my trees. But this time, things were about to take a serious turn. It all started when I realized that a trail running through the edge of my property had been used by a few neighbors like it was their own private path. I didn't mind people walking by once in a while, but this trail cut straight across my yard, and honestly, it was my land. After careful planning, I decided it was finally time to mark my boundary legally and clearly. I got the materials, measured everything carefully, and started building a simple fence. Nothing flashy, nothing aggressive, just a clear line showing where my property began. Then came the moment I knew would trigger drama. HOA Karen noticed the fence going up and immediately lost it. She stormed over, yelling about blocking access and neighborhood rights, claiming the trail was somehow hers. I tried to explain that it was my land, that I had checked with the local regulations, and that I had every right to protect my property. But nothing I said seemed to calm her down. Her face was red, her hands were waving, and neighbors were starting to gather, curious about the commotion. That's when things escalated in ways I never expected. People started taking sides. The HOA got involved. And suddenly, a simple fence became the center of a full-blown neighborhood conflict. By the end of the day, I was left standing there, wondering just how far HOA Karen would go, whether this was going to end in a legal battle or something even crazier. And just when I thought I had seen it all, she did something that completely caught me off guard. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. Before the fence, I had tried to be a good neighbor. I waved when I saw people walking past, occasionally offered a smile, even let a few of them use the path when it was convenient. I didn't want any conflict. But HOA Karen was different. She had a way of making every small thing feel like a personal attack. She wasn't just upset about the fence. It felt like she wanted to claim every inch of space she could see. Over time, I realized she thrived on controlling the narrative in the neighborhood. And anyone who dared step outside her rules quickly became the problem. The trail itself wasn't just a random path. It was old, narrow, and had been there for decades, but it had never been officially recognized as a public right-of-way. In my research, I found old property maps showing the boundary lines clearly, and mine ended right where I was building the fence. I thought that would be enough to stop any nonsense, but HOA Karen didn't care about maps or rules. Her idea of fairness clearly wasn't the same as mine. Neighbors started whispering, some siding with her, others quietly supporting me. That tension made every interaction feel like walking on a tightrope. I began to notice subtle signs. Doors slightly ajar when they shouldn't be, cars lingering suspiciously, little notes left on my gate. It was as if the fence had awakened something in the neighborhood that had been dormant for years. Suddenly, even casual strolls felt charged, like a scene where everyone was waiting for the next explosion. What I couldn't anticipate was just how far HOA Karen would go to assert her control. She began showing up at the property with friends, taking photos, pointing out details as if she were inspecting my every move. Every day, I felt the pressure mounting, my patience stretched thinner and thinner. And yet, something about the way she acted hinted at a deeper motive, one that wasn't just about a hiking trail. It was personal, almost obsessive, and I had no idea what she was planning next. As the days went on, the tension only grew. Little by little, the fence that I thought would bring peace became a symbol of something much bigger, the next encounter. With HOA Karen promised to push things to an entirely new level. It wasn't long before the HOA got involved, and that only made things worse. Suddenly, what I thought would be a private property matter turned into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. I started receiving formal letters, some polite, some threatening, claiming that I was violating community guidelines by building the fence. Reading them, I realized how much power the HOA held and how little control I actually had over perceptions, even when I was in the right. It was frustrating, but also strange. Part of me was almost impressed by how organized HOA Karen was. Rallying support, citing rules, and making every minor infraction seem like a crisis. Meanwhile, the neighbors' reactions added another layer of tension. A few older residents who had lived there for decades quietly supported me, dropping hints that HOA Karen had always had a reputation for overstepping boundaries. Others were afraid to take sides, worried they might become her next target. And then there were the curious onlookers walking past the fence and whispering, sometimes taking videos on their phones. It felt like my yard had turned into a stage and I was stuck in the middle of a show I never auditioned for. The fence itself became a symbol in the neighborhood, a line drawn in more ways than one. For me, it was about protecting my land and asserting my rights. For HOA Karen, it seemed to represent a challenge to her control, something she couldn't ignore. Every interaction with her escalated the tension. A pointed remark over the fence, a passive-aggressive email, or the occasional appearance with neighbors in tow, as if she were inspecting my property like a drill sergeant. I couldn't tell if she was trying to intimidate me or prove something to herself. But the effect was the same every day. The conflict grew sharper. Then there were the rumors. People started speculating about past disputes, long-forgotten arguments, and hidden motives. Some said HOA Karen had personal grudges. Others whispered about her need to assert dominance in every corner of the neighborhood. I couldn't separate truth from exaggeration, but it was clear that this conflict was bigger than just a fence. It had become a psychological battle. With the neighborhood caught in the crossfire, and through it all, one question kept nagging at me. How far would HOA Karen actually go before this escalated beyond anything I could control? Every day after that felt like walking through a storm. HOA Karen had stepped up her tactics, showing up at the fence almost daily. She would pace along it, muttering under her breath, taking photos, sometimes even confronting me directly in front of neighbors. Each time, her tone grew sharper, more aggressive, and her arguments less about rules and more about control. I started feeling cornered in my own yard, like no matter what I did, nothing would calm her down. The neighbors' involvement only made it worse. Some started posting online, sharing photos of the fence, speculating about the feud. Others began quietly siding with HOA Karen, either out of fear or loyalty. I felt a strange mix of isolation and tension every time I stepped outside. Even casual walks or chores felt like potential confrontations. Every sound outside the crunch of gravel, a distant voice made me jump, wondering if it was her or one of her allies coming to escalate the situation. Then there were the unexpected twists in the smaller subplots. My gardener, who had always been friendly, hinted at overhearing conversations that suggested HOA Karen was planning something more extreme than just complaints. A neighbor I barely knew dropped by to warn me, whispering that she'd seen HOA Karen talking to the HOA board, showing photos of my fence and framing it as a community violation. Even my friends started expressing concern, urging me to document everything. To be careful. The tension reached its peak the day HOA Karen decided to confront me directly. She showed up in the early morning, flanked by a few other neighbors, pointing fingers, demanding answers, her voice carrying across the street. I tried to stay calm, explaining the legal boundaries, the maps, my research, but it was like talking to a wall. She wasn't listening. She wanted a reaction, wanted me to admit some wrongdoing that didn't exist. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a fence or a hiking trail anymore. It had become a test of wills, a standoff with no easy way out. Every choice I made felt critical, and one wrong move could make everything explode. And just when I thought the tension had peaked, HOA Karen did something that left me frozen in disbeliefs, something that would push this conflict to a breaking point. The entire neighborhood would remember. Just when I thought I had seen the worst, the situation took an unexpected turn. HOA Karen didn't just confront me verbally this time. She started organizing what looked like a neighborhood inspection of my property. Cars began pulling up almost daily, people milling around as if they had a right to be there. Flyers appeared on doors, warning neighbors about violations on my land. Suddenly, the fence wasn't just a boundary line. It had become the center of a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. The tension escalated further when I received a formal notice from the HOA board, citing obscure rules I hadn't even known existed. According to the letter, the fence allegedly interfered with community pathways and could result in fines or legal action. Reading it, I felt a mix of disbelief and frustration. Everything I had done was legally sound. I had checked property lines, permits, and local codes, but HOA Karen had somehow managed to twist the situation in her favor, framing it as a threat to the neighborhood. What made it worse was that some neighbors were now openly taking sides. A few began subtly harassing me, leaving passive-aggressive notes or photographing my yard. Others whispered rumors about me, questioning whether I had permission to build at all. Even the casual support I had from longtime residents started feeling fragile, as though anyone could be swayed under the right pressure. I began second-guessing every step I took, wondering how many hidden allies HOA Karen had pulled into this escalating feud. Then came the second twist, one that completely caught me off guard. I discovered that HOA Karen had secretly contacted a local news outlet, framing the fence as a community controversy and casting me as the troublemaker. Suddenly, what I thought was a private property dispute had entered the public eye. Calls, emails, and even strangers started showing up at my door, curious or taking sides. And the intensity of the conflict surged to a new level, with the neighborhood on edge, the HOA breathing down my neck, and the public watching. It became painfully clear the fence was no longer just about land. It had become a lightning rod for drama, control, and secrets. And whatever happened next was going to push everything to the breaking point. The day everything came to a head started like any other, but I could feel the tension in the air as soon as I stepped outside. HOA Karen was there, more determined than ever, pacing along the fence with that familiar, fiery glare. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, some cheering her on, others quietly observing. I took a deep breath, knowing that this confrontation would decide the future of my property and my peace of mind. I calmly stepped forward, holding the property maps and legal documents I had meticulously prepared. I explained point by point that the fence was fully within my land, that no public rights-of-way existed, and that I had followed every local regulation. At first, HOA Karen tried to interrupt, raising her voice, but the clarity of the facts left her flustered. I could see some of the onlookers beginning to question the narrative she had been spreading. Then, in a final dramatic move, she tried to escalate things further, demanding that the HOA board take immediate action to remove the fence. That's when the unexpected happened. A longtime neighbor who had quietly supported me from the start stepped forward with additional historical documents showing that the trail had always been part of my property. Not only that, but they revealed that HOA Karen had previously been warned about overstepping boundaries in the neighborhood. The revelation shocked everyone, and the momentum shifted instantly. The HOA board members, realizing the facts were irrefutable, quietly stepped back, leaving HOA Karen visibly rattled. Her frustration was obvious, but there was no legal ground to challenge me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief washing over me as the crowd slowly dispersed. My fence remained, standing as a clear boundary, and my property rights had been affirmed, just as I thought the ordeal was finally over. The final twist hit. One of HOA Karen's allies, who had been quietly recording the confrontation, uploaded the video online. Overnight, the story went viral, turning my quiet neighborhood drama into a national talking point. Suddenly, the fence feud became a larger conversation about property rights, community rules, and how far some people will go to control what isn't theirs. Even with the main conflict resolved, it was clear that life in the neighborhood would never be the same. Neither would I.